2, 1. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a special live coaching call with Lise here from Chesterfield Montessori in St. Louis. Lise, welcome back. We're so excited to have you back.
I'm excited to be back. I can't wait to hear everyone's questions and hope I can answer everyone.
Yes, exactly. And so we're having this call because we know, Lise, you are an expert in admissions and really, honing in on the processes that help build your community, really, because admissions is it's not a silo, right? We don't operate in just the front end, but really knowing your whole community. So we're excited to hear about some strategy that you use in your school, but also, in the broader community, what do you see as far as what people really need to do to build those programs?
Sure, absolutely. We can talk about all of that and hopefully we can get people's answers.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a really good list of attendees here. So I imagine many of you have questions for strategies. So please do chat them in. Lise is just really here to answer any of your questions. And Lise, while people are chatting, I'd love to hear from you some of the before and after, right, of implementing some of your strategies, because you've been in your role for a couple of years, right?
At this school for 10 years, yes.
Oh, 10 years. Oh my goodness, I thought it was a couple of years. That's Kim, I think. So yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about, before you started and then after you started and some of the journey that you've gone through over the past 10 years.
Sure. So I come to Montessori from the time that I was a small child, actually. I went to Montessori school. My mother has some training as well, primary and toddler trained. So I really grew up in Montessori. I didn't evaluate Montessori in terms of like what it did for me until I had my own children and was looking to put them into school. And of course, Montessori was high on that list, but why was that? And that's when I began to really delve more deeply into the whys of what does it mean as a parent when you are going to consider enrolling your child in Montessori. So I come to this from kind of a lot of different angles, having been in the classroom myself, working with those materials, growing up in a family of Montessorians with lots of discussion around Montessori, in a very well-known established school where we're continually honing our practices, and of course as a parent. And what did this mean for my children? So what does this mean for all of the children who come to our school? And admissions is a continual practice. I think it's not a stagnant thing. You can't just do one thing and expect that one thing is going to work all the time. The parents change, the school evolves, the children change. So you have to look at it really as a whole practice. And just like a Montessori classroom, you have to think about, what is good for the student, what is good for your program, and what is good for your school. And those are really important questions to ask yourself as you're working through the admissions process. And Deneen mentioned operating in a silo, and I do think that this is a very important point because you really should not be doing that. It would be really, really important for you to be in touch with your community constantly. Yes, you do enroll them, and you are passing them over to the classroom, obviously, because once they're in the classroom, the teacher is their primary point of contact. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be open and available to the parents, to the teachers, and to the children themselves as things come up. Parents will want to ask you. And the long term, you have to think of admissions in a long-term process. Like when I'm enrolling a new student in our school, I'm not thinking of just enrolling them in that moment. I'm thinking about enrolling them over a period of many, many years. Our school starts at 16 months and we graduate students at 8th grade. I'm sure all of you have different programs. Some of you might be only Nido and primary, others may go all the way through adolescent as well. You might have emerging programs. And so I have worked through all of those programs. I just haven't done high school yet. We don't have a high school here in St. Louis, but I'm in touch with a lot of high school administrators as well. And there's different things that you're looking for when you're enrolling in each of those programs. And so I know all about that. So any questions that you would like to ask, feel free. I'm ready.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'd love to hear some challenges that you're experiencing now. So maybe if you don't have a specific question, but are experiencing something, you know, Lise can definitely give us some advice. And again, while we're waiting, Lise, to, for people to chat in, would you mind kind of walking us through the process of moving from a prospective parent all the way through enrollment? And I know, you know, this conversation really spawned from introducing the Montessori admissions funnel, but I'd love to hear from you how you're moving your prospects all the way through enrollment.
I think it would be important to point out, some of you may not have attended our previous admissions process conversation. And what would be important to point out is by the time someone actually contacts you, they have done a lot of research and they have been looking for your school in all different kinds of ways before you ever speak with them on the phone. So you have to back up to how are people finding you? What are they hearing about you in the community? What are they seeing on your website? Is everything accurate? Is it representing you to the very best of your ability? Does your website really reflect what your school looks like? Is the message that's on your website reflecting what you are telling parents when you actually meet them face to face? How are you finding these parents? Are you using social media? Are you using your community? At our school, we do pretty much everything. We use our website, of course, that's the primary thing. When people find you, right, they even drive by the school, they're going to look at your website. Mm-hmm. But if they don't drive by your school, how else do they hear about you? So we do a lot of social media advertising. We do still do print advertising as well. It just depends on your individual school budget, right? You want, if your community has a really strong local newspaper or a local sort of a magazine. I don't know sometimes what they call those. They're not really magazines, but they're like community
bulletins,
like a bulletin or something. If your community has something like that, you want to make sure that you're in there. If you're in an area that has a lot of strong schools. Now, I live in St. Louis and we have a lot of really good independent schools. So we are a member of the Independent Schools of St. Louis. We're actually the only Montessori school here who's a member of the Independent Schools of St. Louis, but this was really important to us because these are our peers. Our children graduate from our school and go on to these schools. So we wanted to have a strong presence. So you have to think about your presence in the community. And you have to get that to a point where people consider your school a really excellent option, right? So that's like a whole big wide world out there that you have to funnel into finding you. And then once they actually contact you, that's when your face-to-face work begins. So first, usually people will email or call us, depending on how they found us. They might call because they saw us on our Google page, our Google business page. So that's an important thing that you need to be looking at. How is Google representing your company? And you have to remember that Google just takes the most information that it can find in the World Wide Web and can channel things into there. So your reviews will reflect there, even if somebody put it in a different place like Yelp, which would seem an odd place to put a review for a school, but people can do that. So then it will all funnel its way to that Google page. So you have to think about how are people seeing you, right? By the time they call you, this has been a big process. So then when they call you, the important thing is starting a relationship. That was something we talked about the last time. How do you really deeply build that relationship? And this is really, really important because that relationship is going to tie them in and make them feel that they're part of the community. So if they just email you or they're just looking for your tuition, hopefully all of you have a tuition gate on your website, which will allow people to find out a little bit more about your school, and they can take a little quiz or something. We use a quiz that says, is Montessori right for your child? And then it matches them or doesn't match them. I don't know who gets matched and who doesn't get matched, but in any case, they get the match, they get the tuition, but they also get an email from me. Now, this is an automatically generated email, but it's written so that it doesn't look like that. It seems like a personal email, and it gives them some more points to consider when they're looking at our school. Many people respond directly back to that email as if I have personally emailed them. And then I immediately begin that conversation because I want to find out about their family. because in admissions, you are interviewing them as much as they are interviewing you. Because again, we're going to go back to what is best for your school, what's best for the program, and what's best for the children that you already have. So you have to have refined and honed these processes and have thought about who your best students are going to be. And then you have to look at every child who comes in, that family, and people will surprise you. Sometimes you think they are going to be a great fit, and then they need a lot more education than you realize. You have to be willing to put in that work. Other times they come in and they've done research about Montessori, but it might not be accurate, you know, so you need to be asking a lot of questions, and always just assume that as much as they believe they know about Montessori, the deeper you can get the conversation going with them about their family and envisioning their child in this environment and what are the children doing in that environment, the more connection you're building. The more connection you build, the more likely they are to feel a sense of community with you, which will most likely get them to enrollment. But I say most likely because it's not every time that that happens. Families will have financial commitments, or they might be thinking about enrolling and it's a really great fit, but then they say, you know what, we are going to have to move in 6 months. Do you want to enroll a child for 6 months only or not? We don't. So every school has different processes for that, and you need to know all of those before you begin these conversations. So you have to be very clear within your community about what you are looking for and it is acceptable to you.
Mm-hmm. So Lise, this may or may not be a good time to ask this question, and feel free to table it for later, but I'm curious to know, as far as numbers, so this is a challenging thing, I think, for a lot of admissions directors, you know, really balancing out your classrooms, what you'll have available, especially at the toddler level, right? Because you have transitions going through all the time. How do you work with the numbers in each community that you have, and because I know you have a waiting list too, how do you filter that in? Do you have any strategies to make it a little bit easier and not this like big crazy number game?
Yes, because it can seem like a big crazy number game, but when you really sit down and analyze those numbers and break them apart, it actually becomes much more simple. At our school, we have 2 toddler classrooms. And when we say toddler, we don't do NIDO. We do 16 months to 3 years are the toddler age group. If the children have been there from 16 months, they will typically transition closer to just after 2.5 years of age. We wait till they reach 2.5, and their toileting is very secure and solid, and they have met developmental milestones. Then we will begin that transition. If they come in later to the program, we will wait till they are closer to 3 or about 3 before transitioning them to the primary. So we'll use toddler as an example, 2 classrooms, and we have a numbers cap. We know that in our particular environments, based on the space that we have, we actually allow in only 10 children to each of those rooms. Ideally, we can let in to 12, like the AMI really loves 12. We can easily fill 12. I have a wait list for both classrooms. However, that being said, the AMI consultants have agreed with us that 10 is a really good number for our rooms. So you have to look at the space that you have. How many children can you handle, right, in those classrooms? Your teachers, obviously you need to have your trained teachers and the assistants. Do you have enough extra staff for napping? Like there's a lot of things that you need to look at in this program. Now, mind you, I wear many hats. I'm also the assistant head of school, so I look at long-term strategic plans as well, which some of you may not do. So it may not be up to you how many children are in your environment, whereas I can decide that. So let's say that someone has given you this number and said that between 10 and 12 is your max. Okay, then you need to look at each classroom. And you need to be in constant contact with the teachers, because let's say that you know that Jane is getting ready to transition up to primary, but she's not quite there with some things and might need more time. You can't just fill the spot that you're anticipating is going to be open unless you know for sure that she's ready to transition, and what time frame is that? So I have a whole spreadsheet that I have created that I work with, and you all may do this in a different way, but it's easier for the teachers and for our head of school, for me, to look at the toddlers on paper, because it is more of a rolling process with the toddlers, because they don't stay as long in that young children's community as they do in primary, right? You know that once you reach primary and elementary and adolescent, you're staying for 3-year cycles. So I have to look very carefully at who's coming in and who's going out. But because I have those relationships built with the teachers in my classroom, I can also see when a spot is coming open and when it might not be quite ready to come open. And so I have families get onto a wait list. At our school, you have to do that by turning in the application and a particular questionnaire that the parents complete for that program. And they know that they're on the wait list. This does not guarantee them a spot. I would stay in contact with them. Okay, this spot might be coming open. We're anticipating that this child is going to transition at this time. This may take a month, it may take 2 weeks, it may take 1 week, it may take 2 days. It really is dependent on the child. So the parents understand that this is an individual process with every child within that group. And then I can stay in touch with them, and then they can enroll. Now, if I have, depending on the time of year, I will usually have parents enroll 6 months before, at a minimum, before they're going to come into that classroom environment. So let's say that the school year started and you are going to have a child who starts in January. I have a very good idea of who's going to be in my classrooms in January. I can see if there's going to be spots coming over. Am I anticipating these children are going to transition at this time? So I will have those parents sign an enrollment agreement in September for that January spot. With toddlers, depending on your school, sometimes you can do that before. Some of you may not even have enrollment agreements. Every school does it a little bit differently, but we do that, which is a legally binding document that says that the parents agreed to pay the tuition. But we can negotiate about the first day. And so they're not officially enrolled until they've signed that enrollment agreement, but the first day, we will say, we are anticipating an April 1st start. We might need an extra week, for example, to have this other child fully transition out. How are they feeling about that? Can they handle that? Do they need that spot because of a nanny situation? So there's a lot of things that happen in this process that you just have to have built that relationship along the way so that they are trusting you, listening to you, because they know that their child will be given the same care and consideration as the children who are already in the program. And I think that's an important thing. So I think it's just good to bear in mind that every school does things differently. You know, you have different processes in that. So your school might do things slightly different than our school does.
Yeah, I'd be curious, for those that are here, is that typically what you do with toddler communities? And if not, what are some other ideas that you have, or questions that you have for Lise as well? We've got 14 people, so you guys have to have questions somewhere. And no one's chatted in questions yet, but I'm sure someone's got some questions. So Lise, if I'm understanding correctly, you do, so let's say somebody comes in September and they're looking for a toddler program. They know that their child isn't ready yet. Maybe their child is only 10 months old and you only accept at 16 months. So do you enroll them in anticipation of a January start date? And so that
space available, yes.
Yes, yeah, perfect. Okay. And then you also tell them that, you know, it may or may not be at this time. We need a week or two buffer room to fully transition the other child out.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Okay.
That's correct. That's correct. Now that's for the toddler process. Once you reach primary, that process does change at our school because we are a member of the Independent Schools of St. Louis, which I mentioned. Some of you may have that same type of organization in the city where you are. So we have to follow the independent schools guidelines for admissions processes, as well as allowing rolling admissions in an AMI Montessori environment, because rolling admissions allows us to start children at almost every month of the entire year, because our school does run a 12-month program. So for instance, I would not start children in December because we would have all the holidays. We don't like to start in late November. You would have had to start, typically, I will say you need to start by October, and November and December are harder start dates. You can start again in January. You cannot start in May unless you're a toddler. And yeah, those are pretty much my dates. But so I'm working with two different processes here, right? Montessori follows the readiness of the child to enter the program. And the Independent Schools of St. Louis says that all of us who are members of the Independent Schools of St. Louis need to enroll this year by March 25th. So that's what I'm in the middle of now. I am re-enrolling our current students and enrolling new students. So everyone who knows that when they come to visit the school, usually we get very heavy admissions starting in January again. January through March is an extremely heavy admissions time, and that could be because of our particular climate in St. Louis. Everyone knows that this deadline is coming and you need to make a decision about the school and enroll. So we have parents enroll for the fall semester now. They need to enroll now, and they need to have made a decision and turn in their enrollment agreement to us by this date. This allows me to look and see how many spaces I have open after that date, because of course you're always going to have new families who come to you who might just move to the area, or just it's their first child and they're going to turn 3 and they're thinking they're really ready to go to school, and I'd like them to have more social interaction but have no idea how this process works. That enables me to say, this is how many spaces I actually have available in each of my classrooms. And it's a very tricky process, something I have to think very deeply about, because I have to allow enough spaces for the toddlers to transition into those primary classrooms in the course of the school year. So I have to say, we have 2 toddler classrooms of 10 students each. In the course of the school year, I'll probably have seven, let's say 7, sometimes 8 students transitioning up from each classroom. Now we have 3 primary classrooms, so that's okay because I only have 2 toddler classrooms moving into 3 primary classrooms, and then they get divided between those 3 primary classrooms depending on the best fit for them, right? Their age group, the dynamics between the children. The primary teacher will visit the toddler classrooms and be connecting with the toddler teacher. This is something that we set up many years ago that's really, really important for those teachers to be connecting, so they get to know the personality of the child who's moving up. And the primary teachers observe the toddler in the toddler environment, the toddler teacher observes in the primary environment before we ever begin visiting with the toddler child. So this is a whole thought out process. Anyway, this funnel gives me space to see how many more I can add. And then after that, I can see where my spaces are, right? And then I can add children after that March 25th deadline.
Got it. And Emily's got a question for you. How do you handle if a child is set to start in January or mid-year, but then the parents come back and say that for some reason they want to delay the start in Nido or toddler in particular?
Well, that depends on why. I'm sure you're asking why they want to delay the start. So I just had an example of this happening. So I had a sibling who I had on the wait list to start in toddler. And first it was going to be right at 16 months. And then the parents were hesitating because they had a nanny as well, and they didn't want to lose the nanny. So then they thought, well, maybe we'll wait till the fall. And I actually needed to tell them they couldn't, because then their child would be older than the cap that they're allowed to enter. So at our school, we decided internally that a child really needs to enter the toddler program before the age of 2. And then we refined that a little bit more, because before the age of 2, okay, well, does that mean you can let them in at 23 months? Well, they're awfully close to 2 at 23 months. So we said by 22 months, they needed to enter. Mm-hmm. Ideally, 20 to 22 months would really be the oldest. We want to let them enter because otherwise they miss a sensitive period in that classroom. So this particular child was going to now be older than this when they would enter in primary. And I was very clear with the parents up front when they first delayed that 16-month start. And I said, okay, that's totally fine. I understand your situation. And I'm going to change their spot on the wait list to a June start, which was 20 months. And I said, or 21, might have been 21 months. And I was like, this is pretty much the area right in here. You'll have to start between June and July. But after that, you can't start, and you're going to need to wait until primary. Are you willing to do that? So I think being very clear with the parents also about why you have limitations on your side. Why is that? In our case, if the child is over 2 and entering that environment, the environment doesn't serve the same purpose for them, right? They've missed sensitive periods. And then you actually need to wait till you get to the next level for them to enter. So if you're very clear about with the parents from the start, why you're doing this, why you're setting those limits, and just tell them, well, you can totally wait. We get it. We understand. And we want your family to be happy, but these are our requirements on our end. Mm-hmm. And they need to honor those and respect those. And I think the thing is, if you're afraid to lose them as a family, stick by your guns, because lose them as a family. It's okay. You will find another family to come in and take that spot, because if you just keep adding children at the wrong time to the classroom, what does that do to the program? What does that do to the classroom as a whole? How does that make the teachers feel? Are they being respected and listened to? Is it disrupting their classroom? Is it actually best for the child to enter the program, at the wrong age? It actually isn't. The answer to all of those questions would be in the negative. No one would feel respected. The children would not be functionally optimally. The classroom wouldn't be functionally optimally. And you need to really stand your ground on that. It's okay to delay the start. It's not okay for them to delay it at a time that does not work with the school. And as long as you're clear about that, then they can do with that what they will. And there will be another child who will fit in the right way.
Right. And Lise, that's why we consider admissions directors gatekeepers, right? You're working with the incoming families, but you're also protecting your programs. And you're also selling your programs, right? So you do so many things with that, but finding that fine balance of making sure that it's the right fit for your school because you want your community to thrive.
So those two actually go together. You are selling your program and you're protecting the classrooms. So if you're showing parents a classroom that's not functioning optimally, that will show in your admissions process, right? So that's why those two go hand in hand, and they are interconnected, because the classroom needs to function optimally for it to work, and for the children to be engaged and happy, their needs need to be met at all levels. And if you are putting a child in just to fill a number, but not because it is the best thing for that student, for the classroom, for the program, for the school as a whole, that will change the dynamics of your classroom. And there's going to be a lot of frustration. And then your program is not going to sell as well when parents come to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. See, Lise, can you walk us through your criteria for selecting families that fit? Because you are blessed with a wonderful wait list, right? And so I imagine you've got a lot of decisions that you have to make, and probably a lot of families that would fit. So when it comes down to it, what is your criteria for having them enroll?
First of all, have a very open mind. Do not make any prejudgments about families before they come in, because you really don't know, first and foremost, just when they first contacted you. For instance, we as a school don't allow children to enter at the kindergarten year who have not had previous Montessori experience. Of course, because that is the capstone year of your primary experience, and our children are going on to our elementary program. So parents know when they contact the school that we go all the way through 8th grade. If you're not familiar with Montessori, you might think that it's perfectly acceptable to enter in kindergarten because that's when other schools start. But at our school, we don't start there, and that is the capstone year. So that creates a problem. The children are not then the proper leaders in the classroom because they don't know how to do all of that work. They don't understand how the classroom operates. They may not want to touch any of the sensorial materials, for example, because developmentally they're beyond that, but yet that's the foundation for the academics in the program, right? So that's a very good example. If a family calls in and says that they have a child in kindergarten, for me not to make an immediate assumption that they wouldn't be a good fit, right? So I have to always, always, always talk to them completely openly, because why are they coming to us at this time? Have they been in a Montessori school before? Maybe they were in a Montessori school before, and then they thought, well, I'm going to send my child to public school for kindergarten and first grade, put them in right before maybe a second semester, and then think, oh, this is not actually what I really want. I really want to go back to Montessori. So first and foremost, keep an open mind, because you can't make a prejudgment on who you think is going to be the right fit. You just don't know. So you have to be open and accepting when everyone comes to you. If you have that mindset, when a family really isn't the right fit, you're able to get your message across better to them, because then they're in an opening and listening frame. So then you start the process, right? Like I will tell families up front, I want to be clear, you know, if they call me and their child would be entering kindergarten, then I tell them, no, we actually don't usually accept at this age range. Like, has your child been in a Montessori school before? Tell me all about your family. Let's learn about you. So then a lot of times parents who want to come to us for the kindergarten year, their child might still only be 4 because they're thinking about next year. So then once I explain to them why we don't do that kindergarten entry, I can back up and say, if I'm talking to the parents feeling like this family might be actually really interested and engaging, like how are they answering my questions about Montessori, right? And when I'm explaining to them, how are they reacting to this? Are they asking me the right questions back? Are they engaged in some way? And then I can say, but we could consider starting now, but you would need to start now, because we need as much time as we can in that primary environment before we could consider moving up to elementary. Would you be open to that? Would you be open to staying in primary a little bit longer to make sure that your child gets everything that they need before moving to elementary? Because we want to make sure that your child feels really safe and secure, has a good solid understanding of the knowledge that's required to move on to elementary. We want to make sure they're getting into the second plane of development. So you have to be careful. Like, I don't talk to parents just right away about the second plane of development, because they don't know what that means. They have no idea what that means. But as Montessorian to Montessorian, we can say this to each other, right? So these are the things that you're looking for. And then families are usually very open to that, and they'll say, oh wow, I never actually thought about that. Okay, I could consider this, right? So then they need to come in for a tour. And this goes for all families who come in for a tour. If a family just calls me and they have a 2.5-year-old and we talk about the primary environment, they're too old to go to toddler, we could consider primary. Are they toilet trained? So there's a lot of questions that I'm asking along the way, trying to get to know this family before we even get to the tour. Sometimes they just want to make the tour. That's great too, because then I can ask all those same questions when we're face to face. It's that relationship that's so important. And you've got to get all those little nuggets of information. So when you're showing them the classrooms, you can really say to them, can you imagine your child in this setting? You know, and you would say, Henry is 3 years old. So let's look at the children first who are 3 years old in this classroom. Let's talk about why you really need to work with the sensorial materials and the practical life materials. Because what you're doing now is you're setting the foundation for the understanding of what parents have when their child goes in the classroom. Because there are all different kinds of parents, right? If you don't do your work well, that parent might come back to you and say, or worse, say to other parents and not say to you, I am spending an awful lot of money for my child to be washing tables all day, right? So this is going to become a challenging parent. And they're not telling you that. They're actually going out in the community and saying all of these things. So the better that you can educate, even during the tour process, you can start to stave off some of these things, because if they understand, even when they're touring, why that sensorial and practical life is so important for that age group, and you can say, this would be Henry, this is what he would be doing, and let's follow his process in the classroom. That is already helping you in this long-term enrollment. Because if you remember before, we said we're not enrolling for just a 1-year period, even though the enrollment agreement at our school covers 1 year at a time. We're enrolling for the long term. So I guess to answer your question, it's really an interview process that we're having. And you have to pay attention to your red flags.
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, that's such a good point too. When you have a lot of really great families, which, we're all hoping for that, right? And you've got this many spots, do you go based on date of application, or what is like the final decision making?
So families, after a family has toured, and I've explained the whole admissions process to them, because first I show them the school and talk to them about what their children are doing. And then I sit down with them and have a conversation about how the enrollment works at our school and what they are going to get out of this experience, and what their communications will be from us, how we are expecting to partner with them, because we're putting expectations on that as well. We are expecting the parents to partner with us in the education of their children. Then I send a follow-up email that also outlines all of those things, so the parents are clear. And right now I'm working with my March 25th deadline, so this is a good example. And right now, everyone who's toured from January through March, I've told them the process, I've explained how it works, how to get on the wait list, and that we pull from the wait list. If they don't send the application in right away, then I'm not going to offer them one of those spots. The spot will always go to a family who has already put the application in. On occasion, internally, it may be that I have, I don't know how you guys term this. This is really an internal thing, how we talk about it when we're looking at admissions. We'll use primary, for example. In a primary, typically the children have 3 years in a primary cycle, right? Your first 3 to 4 year old year, your 4 to 5 year, and your 5 to 6 year, which is your kindergarten year. But children's birthdays fall at all different times, right? So some children actually get a 4-year cycle in primary versus a 3-year cycle. So when I am having my classroom list and I'm organizing the children and looking at these who are in these groupings, I can see who I would consider a P1, a primary 1, and that's the age group that falls within a certain range, who's a P2, which is the next age range, who either turns straight into a kindergartner or who's a P3 and has the 4th year as the kindergarten year. So however you do that is going to be particular to your school. But it may be that in this grouping, I'm looking at all 3 of my primary classrooms and I'm saying, gosh, we have a lot of P1 children, really a lot of them. It might be okay to let a P2 child enter because they're still in between that, like they're around 4 years of age. And that's still okay for us to let those children enter. We can still do a P3 depending on when the birthday falls, and then the kindergarten, we don't like that. But the P3s need to start immediately, right? That would be that group. You have to start immediately and have your kindergarten year next year. So it just depends on the immediacy of the action. And sometimes I will flat out tell parents, I will email them all at the same time. I'd say, these are the spots that I have coming open. This could be a spot for your family, but it's first come, first serve. And you need to be aware that there are 4 other families who would also like this spot. I'm, giving you all this opportunity. I don't always do that. Usually I'll choose first and inform the parents so that we don't have any weird arguments over who's getting a spot and who's not, because that would be really bad. But on occasion, I have had that happen where I've said to 2 families, okay, this spot is coming open, and now I leave it to them. The family that acts first and immediately responds and does everything that they are supposed to do in this process, then they'll get the spot over the family who's hesitating. Because if they're hesitating, there might be another underlying reason, or
Mhm.
You don't know. But you can only do that when you have a big wait list.
Mhm.
If you don't have that wait list, that doesn't work as well for you.
Right.
So it depends on your school.
Right. So I imagine you have specific language, written language, that is clear about your selection criteria for the
Yes.
families as well. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because a lot of it, of course, is about the relationship, but then, misinterpretations can happen. And so what type of writing do you have so it's super clear for the parents to understand that this is what the process is?
It's on our website, first and foremost, so the parents can look at that before they come in. We talk about the admissions process and that we don't discriminate in this admissions process. So we have language that's used formally there as well. And then, like I said, I send that follow-up email that carefully outlines what it means, and that you turn in the application and the questionnaire depending on your level. If I'm enrolling for kindergarten and elementary, or if the child maybe is a P2 or P3 who's had a previous school experience, school records are requested in this as well. And there's also a visiting process depending on the age of the child. So if we're talking about older children, the process does change because the visits are required. And I'm very clear when I email the parents to follow up for their children and those children's ages. This is the process that you would follow, and that the application and the questionnaire do not bind you to the school legally. They only indicate to us that you are interested in our school, you are interested in getting a spot at our school, and it puts you on the wait list. Once you are on the wait list, then I will contact you. Could be a toddler. We will confirm a toddler spot 6 months before. If anything changes in between now and then, a spot becomes free earlier, and I will communicate with you immediately. So I set out these guidelines and processes for the parents so that they clearly understand what they need to do. If it's the time of that March 25th enrollment time, I will say, I will email you to let you know that I'm getting ready to send out the enrollment agreements. You will confirm to me by email that you would still like the spot, and I will create the enrollment agreement and send it out to you. It will be due back to us at this time with an enrollment deposit. Only once this document has been signed by both parents and returned to us with the fee is the child officially enrolled. So I'm very clear about all of that. You're not officially enrolled until that time. And then when that happens, then a whole nother admissions process starts, because then we work through the school records and the online school forms, that we have. So we have a whole process to this, and it really is very dependent on the child and their age. So if you're coming in for elementary, what we would do is we would have a series of visits, sometimes even up to a week of visiting for a child, depending on the child, but they would need to spend a minimum of 1 full day here at our school in the classrooms with the teachers, seeing how they're responding, right? And only after their records have been completed, an evaluation form from the other school has come in, and the visiting has taken place, and then a meeting that is between the parent, the teacher, where the classroom, the child who just visited, and myself, do we make a decision about whether we think that their family is a good fit? And we're clear about this all ahead of time so that the parents understand what the expectations are.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So Lise, we have about 10 more minutes. And for those of you that are here live, if you've got any burning questions that you haven't asked yet, make sure to chat them in. She's wondering, Helen is wondering if you would be willing to share spreadsheet headings. And I think, Helen, correct me if I'm wrong, you're talking about more of like the labels of each of the child, because you do P1, P2, P3, and sometimes P4, right, Lise?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The kindergarten year is the P4.
Okay.
Yeah.
Helen, so if you could just clarify exactly what it is that you mean as far as sharing spreadsheet headings, I'm sure Lise would be happy to do that.
Helen, do you mean the toddler spreadsheet or the other? For toddlers, I have a different process. I have, we have a database at our school that we use for all prospective families. And the toddlers, I create an internal spreadsheet because that helps me to sort of see when children are going to transition out, then that's where I can let children in. So which one do you?
She says for prospective parents and admissions process.
Okay, so we actually use a database which is called Sandbox. It's a FileMaker Pro database. I have heard that there's another really good one for Montessori schools, specifically for Montessori schools. And it might be better than this one that we use, and I can try to find out the name of that for you. But the one that we use is Sandbox, which is a platform of FileMaker Pro. Mm-hmm. When you open that up, you create, when someone contacts you, you create an inquiry form within the database. And in that inquiry form are all different things, everything. I mean, what you have spaces for notes, you can put the date of birth, you can figure out what cycle the child is coming into. Would they be a full day student, half day student? So it like literally is custom created to all the things that we would want to see in this admissions process. I can print out all of this information when I'm looking to see who to add. It also allows me to continually contact those people. We put out a new blog post. We put out a newsletter called the CMS Observer. And I can share these through that website as well because I can email all of these people. And there's sort of a pull down menu that allows me to change them at each stage where they are. So first, they might have just inquired, right? And then they have come in for a tour. So there's like all these drop down menus, and you can say, give an interview rating even. So I could pull up everyone that I had an interview rating of a 10 with and offer spots only to those, or analyze them and figure out where those children are coming in. So for us, that database is crucial because of the sheer amount of inquiries that we have coming in and who you want to keep in contact with in the future and who you want to close out and archive. So that's helpful to us. I suppose you could do it if you had no access to a database. Are there any of you who do not have access to a database like this?
And we do offer a CRM. It's not as complex as FileMaker Pro. I'm familiar with that.
Very complex. I don't know that I would recommend it, to be honest with you. It's for a much more, it's for schools really, I would say, who have like 400 children, which we don't have, but I would say that.
Right. And they also have a nonprofit one too, where that's a whole nother platform.
Yes.
But COSM has created a CRM, and I know we're piloting it with a few other schools. So definitely check that out. I believe it's available at the second plane, the basic level, and then the third and fourth plane, the much more complex one. So that's also coming down the pipeline, so keep an eye out for that. Gabby says she uses Transparent Classroom, and she's wondering if that's the same idea that you're talking about.
Transparent Classroom is awesome. We are switching over to that as well, but only in our classrooms. It's not used for admissions purposes because, at least how I have seen it, it is used for the teachers to keep track of the lessons for the children. It's very, very valuable when you're monitoring how the children are moving through the curriculum at each level and the lessons that they've had and the lessons that they should be getting. But that is really for classroom use. This would be different because it is specifically for admissions. Like I said, FileMaker Pro is complicated and usually for schools that have many, many more children than probably most of us have. But that being said, you could do it with classroom lists. I have done that in the past where I have, and Transparent Classroom might allow your admissions to pull off classroom lists, but I did create an Excel spreadsheet and I identified, I had the name of each child in there, their date of birth, which was really important when I was sorting them because you want to sort by their date of birth so that you can see which level everyone is in. And then you can, because you need to kind of work backwards, you need to figure out at what year they would be in kindergarten and then sort of move backwards to figure out what year they're in your cycle if they're coming to you more in the middle of the primary cycle. And then we also kept track of things like did they take a nap? Did they have lunch at school? Were they a half-day student? Are they a full-day student? Are they an extended day student? Because at our school, that did make a difference in who I was going to have come in. For example, if I had just an overabundance of children who needed the extended care room, and let's say that I actually didn't have enough space in the extended care room or enough nap beds, for example. I know that sounds kind of silly. We don't usually do that because we really accommodate, but you could filter that way when you're going to let families come in. You might say, you know, a half-day child is actually preferable at this time because we have so many lunchers in the classroom and it's actually getting really chaotic for the teacher, and maybe it would be better just to have a half-day student so the teacher is willing to accept a new student, but they are not a lunching and napping student as well. So again, that's something that I don't really need to focus on too much, but you might need to at your school, depending on the size and the space of your rooms, and if you have a separate nap room, a separate lunch, and however you do that. So those would be ways to look at that. And I probably can pull up some of those old ones that I used to use where you can see how we outlined that, because that would, when you're in an admissions process, all you do is you take your existing classroom list and you roll it out. You take your kindergartners off and put them into their elementary classrooms. You move your P1s down to the P2 slot, and then you're looking at what's left over, right? Who do you have? And you can make notes at the bottom. This toddler's gonna start. Actually, if you know that toddler's gonna start at the beginning of the school, you already put them in that classroom because then they're your P1s, they're your beginning of your P1s. And you would do this for every classroom that you have. Then you can see what spaces you're going to have available, if that makes sense. I can do all of this in Sandbox because it's set up that way, but if you didn't have that, you could make spreadsheets and do it. And I can pull that up if anyone needs to see that. I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, that'd be awesome if you could share maybe even some screenshots that I can send to the group after. I think that would be really cool.
Sure.
Awesome.
They're going to be old information, so I've got to dig a little bit, but I've got them.
That's all good, no worries. Okay, last call for questions. We're going to finish up here in the next few minutes. And while we're waiting to see if anyone has a question, Lise, do you have any other kind of final thoughts or pro tips that you can provide those trying to really figure out and hone in on their admission strategy?
Well, I think that the admission strategy is evolving. You have to think of it as evolving. You know, like if you're thinking of it in terms of sales only, obviously you're really honing your sales pitch, right? But parents change. Their communication styles change. Even in the 10 years that I've been at this school, I see a very distinct difference between the parents who enrolled 10 years ago and the parents who are coming in now. Their needs are different and their communication styles are different. So you have to remember to always also analyze what you're doing and continually think of best practices and what can work really in the best way for your school. And those relationships that you have with your classrooms, you as the admissions have with your classroom teachers is really important, because that's helping everybody to stay on the same page. Like we have regularly scheduled meetings that I meet with the elementary teachers, with the adolescent teachers, with the primary teachers, with the toddler teachers. And this is so helpful to all of us because we really feel like we're working as a team together to get the best version of our school always. And, you know, back to Emily's question when she was asking if a child was, you know, set to start in January or mid-year. If I had been a new admissions director, maybe I didn't think that it would be such a problem to keep delaying the start. But this would be a perfect time to go and talk with your toddler teachers, because then they could say to you, you know, I might have been okay with that, but in this case, Matthew is really struggling with his toileting, where we thought he was going to be transitioning at this time. Now I'm thinking he's going to need more time. So those conversations become really, really important. And instead of just automatically thinking, well, it's okay. You know, I guess I understand the parent situation. They're afraid to lose that nanny, but they really want, you know, to come, but then they keep delaying the start. So at a certain point, you do have to put some boundaries around that. as well. And the parents really do respect that and want that from the school. So I think that that's important too. Emily, do you have more questions about that if a parent's delaying in toddler?
Well, I love your answer too, Lise. It's like you're also getting the guide's buy-in and what you're doing, right? And so you're really understanding their world and they're understanding your world, and it's a meeting of the minds to make the right decision for the school.
Yes. And, you know, that being said, sometimes the teachers don't always love all the decisions that I do make. Because again, I am, you know, working as the assistant head of school as well. So sometimes they're not so happy about that and they want to give pushback, but then I have to explain to them, for example, that the whole budget is set on this many children and this is the way that it needs to be. And, you know, but the fact that we can have a conversation about that is really important.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's not always roses. You know, you will have some times where they say, well, this child is just ready to transition. And I have to say, okay, except that the primary teachers are not, are not ready for them at this moment. So.
Right, absolutely. Emily said your answer was great. We find it more in our NITO admissions. It can be challenging on a tuition basis also. And yes, you just said budget as well.
Yes, yes. Yeah, because the budget is important. You know, if you don't fill your classrooms with the right families, then you don't, it causes a lot of other problems, right? And the budget is one of them because you set the budget based on, usually on the number of children that you're expecting in the school. So, yeah, right. You know, you can, so when you set those clear parameters for the families, this is why you can't enter at this time. We'd be very, very happy to have your child come in the primary program, but we really can't wait. Just remember, you will find another parent who will fill that toddler spot for you. And then while the family who wanted that spot might not be that happy, it's for the best. It works out better for your school that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Emily said it is challenging when prospective parents come on tours already knowing that there is a wait list. Yeah. That's what she's considering with this, but she loves the information to think of enrollment from the beginning of a 6-month process, really, in managing the expectations. So she appreciates it.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yep. Absolutely. Make sure you set it all out up front, and then the parents know what they're getting into. They know the financial obligations, when they need to commit by, what that commitment means. And everyone's school is different. Some of you may have evergreen contracts. We don't use that, but I know that schools do or are moving towards evergreen contracts. So there's lots of different things to think about, but as long as the parents know the process.
Perfect. Absolutely. Well, Lise, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge about admissions strategy. It's a tough game to play, right? But you do it so beautifully, and we really appreciate all your insights.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I have to admit, I really love admissions so much. I can't even tell you. Those connections with the parents are really beautiful and create very beautiful long-term relationships that mean a lot to all of us at the school.
Yes, definitely. And Heidi chimed in. Yeah, totally. She was wondering, she'd love to have a call down the road on retention from your perspective.
Oh, yes, yes. I work on retention literally every single day of my job. So
that's right, from the very beginning, right? From the very beginning. Absolutely.
From the very beginning. Yes.
I love it. Well, thanks again, Lise, and thank you all to our live attendees. And if you're watching this recording, feel free to chime in and send us some questions if you've got some follow-up. Lise is a NITO member, and we're so excited to have Chesterfield with us. And so again, thank you, Lise, for joining us.
You're very welcome. If anyone needs to look at our website for information, because I mentioned like the admissions process is also on the website, but not in as full detail as I give in emails following. You can look it up. It's Chesterfield Montessori School, and it's in Chesterfield, Missouri, which is a suburb of St. Louis. I think if you just search Chesterfield Montessori St. Louis, you'll find it. And that might be helpful too.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful website, so enjoy it.
Okay, bye everyone. Thank you so much for coming.
Bye, Lise. Thank you.
Bye.